Good morning everyone and welcome to the Cabinet meeting. I'm Councillor Amanda Hopgood, Leader of Durham County Council and Chair of this meeting today. The meeting is being broadcast live through our YouTube channel, but before we commence with today's formal business, I'd just like to cover some of the housekeeping issues for us all to follow. If you could please switch off or make silent your mobile phones and keep microphones switched off at all times unless invited to speak by myself. When invited to speak, please switch on the microphone nearest to you and introduce yourself. So with that, we'll move on to the agenda. Item 1, public questions. We haven't received any questions for this part of today's meeting. Item 2, the minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of June 2022. Can I have a mover, please?
Move it, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Shotler, and a seconder, please.
Second, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Henderson. Can we agree the minutes are a correct record?
Agreed.
Okay, I can confirm, therefore, that the minutes are agreed. Item 3, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations from members?
Chairman, myself and Councillor Ted Henderson, the governors at the Upperdale School Federation, which encompasses Forest and Teasdale Primary School.
Okay, so in that case, that is the first item on the agenda, so if you gentlemen would like to leave the chamber now. Thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to item 4, which is the proposal to close Forest of Teasdale Primary School on the 31st of August 2022. If I can ask John Pearce, Corporate Director of Children and Young People's Services, to present the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. This report sets out the outcome of the consultation process undertaken on the proposal to close Forest of Teasdale Primary School. Following the consultation process, it is recommended that Cabinet agree to close the school from August the 31st, 2022. The report describes the long-standing challenges with pupil numbers at the school, and the Council understands the importance of our small rural schools and has made every effort in recent years to sustain the school. This has included collaboration with other small schools in the area to form the Upperdales Federation, which has helped to share resources and to support sustainability in the short term. Despite this, Forest of Teasdale currently only has one child on roll and no applications for places in September 22, with no likely demographic changes in the area in the near future. This creates limits on breadth of curriculum and opportunities for social development, which mean it's in the best interests of the pupil currently on roll to be educated across the wider federation, and that arrangement has been in place since September 2021. As a result, a special meeting of the Upperdales Federation governing body on the 11th of January 2022 voted unanimously to move to a consultation on closure of the school. Initial consultation was undertaken for a 4-week period between 28th of February and 10th of April this year, including meetings with governors and staff, as well as engagement events with parents, community and wider stakeholders. During that stage of the consultation, 22 responses were received. 17 of those responses strongly agreed or agreed with the proposal, with 5 strongly disagreeing or disagreeing with it. Information about the responses and the proposals or suggestions put forward by respondents are included in paragraphs 22 to 25 of the report. After consideration of the responses, it was agreed to issue a statutory notice in relation to the proposal, and that was published on the 5th of May 2022. This started a 4-week statutory representation period during which submissions can be made to the Council, either in support or opposition to the proposal. During the statutory representation period, there were no responses received. Cabinet, as a decision maker, has a duty to consider a number of factors set out in the statutory guidance when considering the recommendations made in this report. These are covered in detail in the report between paragraph 32 and paragraph 40, including all the relevant information against each of the factors in the guidance. In conclusion, officers believe the recommendation provides the best option for the future education provision of children living in the area, and the recommendation to Cabinet is set out in paragraph 11 of the report.
Thanks, John. Can I invite Councillor Richard Bell, Deputy Leader and Cabinet Portfolio Holder for Finance, to speak to the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. It is with some regret that I propose this report, which asks Cabinet to agree the proposal to close Forest of Teasdale Primary School on 31st of August. Back in September 1968, I joined this school and spent 6 happy years there, though I didn't like the outside toilets in the winter. Things have changed a bit since then. Back then, the numbers were in the upper 30s. This closure is really a result of rural depopulation. At the peak of the lead mining boom in the 1850s, the population of Forest was over 1,000. 170 years later, it is a tenth of that. School closures are an area of concern, as local communities often see a school as being at the heart of their communities. However, the report makes a compelling case for the closure of Forest School. Schools need to be sustainable to meet the challenges in a rapidly changing educational environment. The objectives of this proposal are to significantly enhance the quality of education provision for children within the community, while ensuring choice of provision and curriculum breadth are enhanced. Schools are funded through dedicated schools grant and operate to delegated budgets, which are the responsibility of the individual school governing bodies. The national funding formula puts more funding into pupil-led factors than school-led factors, which could create longer-term challenges for smaller schools, because the increase in pupil-led funding will be of less benefit to schools with small numbers of pupils. Forest has the lowest pupil numbers of any school in County Durham and serves the least populated part of the county. There is currently 1 child on roll, although that pupil is not currently being taught on site. No pupils started in reception in September 21, and there are no expressions for a first preference to start in reception in September 22. There is no anticipated development in Forest and Teasdale which will bring about an increase in these numbers. This clearly indicates the school cannot remain financially nor educationally viable. I was a governor at Forest until it federated with the Upper Weardale schools, and it was clear that once the school got below a certain critical mass, parents did not feel their children had sufficient social opportunities in such a small school to adequately prepare them for the 800-strong secondary school in Barnard Castle. The teaching and pastoral support at Forest has always been excellent, and I would thank all staff past and present for their work there. The most recent Ofsted report in October 18 identified weaknesses which have been attempted to be addressed by the formation of the Upper Durham Dales Federation, which includes Forest School, together with 3 other small rural schools in Upper Weardale. However, it has become clear that pupil numbers will not increase sufficiently to enable curriculum and social development needs to be addressed. The proposal to close Forest School on 31st of August and for children in that area to be educated in a larger school that allows for more social interaction and which provides a broader education will provide a sustainable model to improve educational outcomes in the area. Clearly, educationally, it is in the best interests of children and their families. The report details the consultation undertaken by the Council on the proposal to close the school and the responses received. The large majorities of responses, 77.3%, support the proposal. This would indicate that the proposal is one which is supported in the community, and in particular the governing body, who have concluded, albeit reluctantly, that closure of the school is the only viable option. The school is rented from Raebury Estates, so there will be no capital receipt by Durham County Council. I ask Cabinet to agree the recommendation to close the school at paragraph 11.
Thanks, Richard. Can I invite Councillor Paul Sexton, Cabinet Portfolio Holder for Adults and Health Services, to speak to the report, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm pleased to second this report, which asks Cabinet to agree to the proposal to close the Forest of Teasdale Primary School on the 31st of August 2022. As Councillor Bell has already stated, this proposal provides a solution to the issues currently being faced by the primary school of extremely low to zero pupil numbers and the consequent impact on the quality of education and social experiences the school can provide. The proposal to close the school is in the best interest of the children and their families from an educational perspective, and we believe it will have a positive impact on those living in the local area. Closing the school is the only means of providing a sustainable future of education in the Upper Durham Dales area, and that the proposal was the correct one on which to consult on due to the low pupil numbers and the financial viability. If the school closes, cost savings of £113,000 per annum will be made. In addition, there will be a saving of £2,250 per year by not renewing the lease with Raby Estates for the use of the building. These funding savings can then be more effectively utilised elsewhere across the education system. Schools need to be sustainable to meet the challenges in a rapidly changing educational environment. The objectives of this proposals are to significantly enhance the quality of education provision for the children within the remote rural location of the Forest and Teasdale area. The one pupil currently on roll at the school is being educated at another school, and evidence suggests the pupil is developing both educationally and socially. Closing a school, especially in a remote rural area, is not a decision that can be made lightly. But having considered all the factors alluded to in this report, there is no alternative than to close the school. The fact that respondents, including the Upper Durham Dales Federated Governing Body, support this proposal indicates that they clearly see the educational benefits it will bring about. Those respondents who did not support it have not suggested an alternative practical solution for the education of the children and young people living in the area. I therefore second the report and the decision it asks Cabinet to agree on. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Paul. Is there anyone else wishing to speak on the report? Okay. In that case, can we agree the report and its recommendations? Great. I can confirm that the recommendations are agreed. We'll just pause for a second while Councillor Henderson and Councillor Shuttleworth return to the chamber. Can I just ask at this stage that Cabinet agree that we take item 8, the Storm Arwen review, now to enable the officer presenting to leave the meeting? All right, thank you. Okay. In that case, we're going to move to item 8, which is a Storm Arwen review. Can I ask Kevin Edworthy, Strategic Manager, Executive Support, to present the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. This report presents the results of a detailed review of the response to Storm Arwen, along with the learning obtained and an improvement plan for managing future incidents. Storm Arwen was an event of unprecedented force and intensity. It hit the north of England on 26th of November last year, late in the afternoon, and continued overnight, causing extensive damage. The storm was followed by freezing temperatures, ice and drifting snow across the higher ground. The initial impact of the storm was felt overnight on the 26th and 27th. Emergency and council services responded to reports highlighting closed roads with fallen trees and debris affecting the highway, as well as property and building damage and winter maintenance operations in the higher areas. The County Durham and Darlington Local Resilience Forum implemented its multi-agency incident procedures on the morning of Saturday the 27th, initially to respond to highway and property damage issues. By Sunday the 28th, however, with large numbers of communities still without power, the Council escalated its response in line with its corporate emergency plan, with particular regard to supporting the most vulnerable in our communities. Northern Power Grid had commenced their emergency response plan as soon as power outages occurred, and initially advised that properties would be connected within a short period of time. However, with many properties still without power by Monday the 29th, the Council requested that the Local Resilience Forum establish strategic and tactical coordination groups on Tuesday the 30th to oversee a full-scale multi-agency response to the storm. The work of the Local Resilience Forum soon identified that a major incident should be declared, which was done on Wednesday the 1st, and that was followed the next day by a request for military assistance. So by Thursday the 2nd, troops arrived from the Royal Lancers to help with ongoing checks on residents and the distribution of food and support packages. The work of the agencies went very much in hand with the ongoing work throughout the week by voluntary and community sector organisations, local residents and elected members and faith groups, who'd established multiple emergency food provision and welfare centres across the county. The work of our communities in providing resilience and support through the difficult aftermath of the storm was outstanding throughout. As power was restored across the county, the major incident was stood down on the 9th of December, and the recovery group was established on the 10th. The clear-up operation lasted for many more days, and tree operations as a result of the storm remain ongoing today. This County Council review is set alongside a number of debriefs and review that have been undertaken in response to the storm. These included a review by the Government Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, which was published on the 9th of June. This was also the date of the final publication of an Ofgem report into the network's response to Storm Arwen. Both of these national reviews contain a number of recommendations which are set out in this report and will work alongside the action plan developed here. Locally, Northern Power Grid have carried out their own stakeholder review, and the Local Resilience Forum has undertaken a multi-agency structured debrief, which also will work alongside this review. The County Council review into the storm consisted of 4 significant data collection exercises. These were officer debriefs, collecting information from on-call officers and those involved in the frontline response. Elected member debriefs, collecting views and experiences of elected members through an online survey. Local community groups, data collected by a telephone survey from community groups involved in the provision of vital frontline support. And a public survey. Members of the public were invited to share their experiences of the storm and the response provided by the Local Resilience Forum agencies, highlighting strengths and weaknesses of the response. The responses were wide-ranging, and the report collates and sets those out in some detail in Appendix 8. There are many common elements found in the response, including the need to better understand and delineate the responsibilities of utility providers and local responders in the provision of support to communities in emergency situations. The need for clear and active communication to both residents and agencies over response times from utility providers and the support available. The importance of local community preparedness and how this can be facilitated by agencies in a more structured way, and how to identify the most vulnerable residents to ensure the right level of support is provided, and how the timescales for guaranteed response standards match these. It was important that the review was conducted in a robust and independent manner, and to help in this respect and to ensure a level of independence, the work was overseen by 2 external agencies: the University of Durham's Institute of Hazards, Risk and Resilience and the Emergency Management team of Cornwall Council. Input from these 2 organisations at key stages of the review was invaluable in providing reassurance and external challenge and helping the review to remain independent and balanced. A substantial action plan has been developed from the findings of the review, and this is set out in full in Appendix 9 of the report, with actions falling into 6 categories which are set out in paragraph 17 and also in paragraph 137 of the main body of the report. The action plan was presented to Safer and Strong Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee on the 20th of May. The committee agreed to support the proposed action plan, and the comments from the chair are included in the report, along with detailed comments from members of that committee. In conclusion, Storm Arwen was one of the most disruptive and difficult weather events the county has ever experienced. The spontaneous community response was outstanding and well recognised. The multi-agency response was also significant and effective, with escalation to a request for military aid demonstrating effective governance. However, there is learning to be taken from the ability or otherwise to deal locally with such a significant disruption on a county-wide scale. This review has allowed all parties to input into a complex review with a resulting action plan for improvement that will provide further resilience in the event of future incidents. Chair, the recommendations are set out in paragraph 18 of the report.
Thanks, Kevin. Can I invite Councillor John Shuttleworth, Cabinet Portfolio Holder for Rural Communities and Highways, to speak to the report, please?
Yes, thanks, Chair. These storms are quite unprecedented in the force and intensity, and also in the devastation they left behind. And I can speak with some authority because I saw it firsthand. Roads were blocked and properties damaged by hundreds of fallen trees. Thousands of people right across the county were left without power for many days, and the impact was felt particularly heavily in our rural communities in the west, where the storm also resulted in freezing conditions, including snowdrifts and ice, which only exacerbated the situation. We will all recall what a difficult time this was for people caught up in the storm and the challenge that it posed to our communities and to the response efforts. I'm sure that we'll all recall how our communities once again rose to the challenge, opening church halls and community centres to provide food and shelter, rallying around to provide help to all those who needed it. Once again, our community stepped up to the need was greatest. The problems were also such a scale and across such a wide area that our emergency response was stretched to the limit, and although our council and our local resilience forum partners moved quickly and decisively, it was soon clear that the size of the challenge meant that military support was required. I recall, as others will, that despite this, there were some frustrations amongst members of the community and members of our council about how the response developed and how it was delivered, with everyone wishing to do the absolute best they could for their communities. This is one for many reasons why this review and this report is so important. It's provided an opportunity for those involved at the time on the front line and in the heart of our communities to have a voice in the learning going forward. In compiling this report and this action plan, we have listened to individuals, to community groups and to members of the council, all of who provided feedback, along with partners from the Emergency Services, the Resilience Forum and Northern Power Grid. We also looked outside the organisation to colleagues at Durham University and Cornwall Council to provide a third-party, independent, fresh pair of eyes over the work as it progressed. I'm grateful to all those institutions for their help. The review presented is comprehensive and informative, but most importantly, the action plan is relevant, focused and deliverable, and hopefully the whole thing won't happen again. And on the basis of that, I'd like to move the report, Chairman. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Can I invite Councillor Mark Wilkes, Cabinet Portfolio Holder for Neighbourhoods and Climate Change, to speak to the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. When we took over this council last year, I didn't expect us to find ourselves hit with a crisis that the previous portfolio holder had failed to prepare for. Indeed, she'd even failed to update our emergency response plan at the time required. That Labour individual has now moved on to higher places to waste money elsewhere, and I'm unimpressed with what she left us with. However, I have to say, our officers, the officers of this council at all levels, did an incredible job during Storm Arwen, working crazy hours to help our residents. They have our and our residents' thanks for that. But I also think it's incumbent on us to recognise that the previous Labour administration did not support and challenge in a way that was necessary and indeed essential for the people of this county. Otherwise we wouldn't be needing to make so many changes. It's also necessary to say that Northern Power Grid was appalling in its initial response to the storm crisis. Everybody accepts the intensity of the storm, and its impact was greater than anything we have seen in the North East in recent times. However, to fail to even bother to inform the local authority and other partners that they had declared an internal emergency was outrageously delinquent on their part. The fact we intervened as a local authority and called for external support from the government and our armed forces is a testament to the fact that we recognised that this was a serious problem and took over where others failed. Looking forward, I am partly reassured that Northern Power Grid has recognised their deficiencies and are working closely with us to ensure that we will be in a far stronger and more resilient position come the next storm. But given that it is our wider electricity network that requires massive investment, I ask NPG, government and our MPs to do more. Push for the investment we need, challenge the status quo, help build the infrastructure that's required. As the lead local authority, our public expect us to be the front line, fighting their corner, protecting and defending them. I believe that we are now doing that, and this report recognises where we need to improve. This is why in our budget this year we increased resources in key areas, one such area being the tree management team. That additional resource is essential and must continue to be invested in and improved after years of unnecessary cutbacks. Our amazing neighbourhoods teams dealt with hundreds of downed trees and residents' concerns during the storms over the last winter, but we can't continue to under-resource the service like Labour did. Across County Durham, there are thousands of trees, including those hit by ash dieback, which are becoming problematic. In addition, many of those trees may not have come down during the storms last winter and are potentially at risk in the coming winter should more severe storms hit, which is why this joint administration have increased our survey resources. As a local authority, we have no choice but to put back in place the investment that the previous Labour administration slashed. This is to ensure the public are safe and is why we started this reinvestment in March's budget. Acting on the key findings of this report are critical to ensure that the public are protected. However, I don't think we can any longer rely just on National Grid to ensure that local communities have the resilience they need when storms, which are likely to become more and more prevalent, occur. The fact that barely one community in the county has that resilient position at the moment is an unacceptable reminder of our past failure. What this report tells the public is that this joint administration is not going to continue as the previous Labour administration did in ignoring this. We're going to build up resilience, we're going to work with communities, we're going to ensure that we have up-to-date emergency response plans for our council, communities and our partners. So when the next problem comes, we're in a far better position than we were left in by the previous administration. It's essential that we build a more resilient county in the face of impacts from climate change, which is why I support this report and will work to implement its findings with colleagues and officers. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Mark. Is there anyone else wishing to speak on the report? Yeah, Richard.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, I would echo much of what Councillor Wilkes has said, though it's not necessarily all about spending more money all the time. If you look at the Improvement Action Plan at Appendix 9, which I would very much commend to Cabinet and the public, a lot of these things really are about putting in better responses in terms of community resilience and corporate response. I think we all recognise that the response of everybody improves with practice, and subsequent storms are responded to much better by all the agencies involved. And what this Improvement Action Plan seeks to do, for example, by having a surge recovery plan, is identify and advance pools of council staff that can be deployed at short notice, to have the resources and the equipment ready to be deployed at short notice. So a lot of this is really about being readiness. In other words, practicing for an event that we hope will be very rare in occurrence. A number of agencies have got responsibilities when something like this happens, clearly, and indeed individuals. The individual has a responsibility, local communities have a responsibility, the council has a responsibility, National Northern Power Grid and the National Grid have responsibilities. The MPs, for instance, have held meetings with them. The council has written to Northern Power Grid. They have issues, technical issues with, they can't say how many or where of their poles are down. They have very primitive electronic monitoring equipment, so they physically have to go out and survey how many poles are down in the aftermath of a storm, which means you have to wait until the conditions are suitable for helicopters to fly around. That sounds rather primitive in this day and age. They have rather antiquated grid equipment where they can't get spares readily, etc., etc. These are resilience issues of a national nature. They have been highlighted by local MPs to national government. Kwasi Kwarteng, the business secretary, visited during Storm Arwen, or shortly afterwards, St John's Chapel and Forest in Teasdale, and was told about a lot of these things. And I would agree with Councillor Wilkes that the council and the MPs need to keep pressure on government to have a national strategy so that when something like this happens, it can be dealt with and responded to quickly. Overall, though, I would very much welcome the report, absolutely commend the Improvement Action Plan in Appendix 9, and look forward to seeing the results of the considerations from the Action Plan being reported back to Cabinet in due course.
Thanks, Richard. Does anyone else wish to speak? Okay. Can we agree the report and its recommendations, please? Okay, thanks. Right. Item 5. Treasury Management Outturn Report 2021-22. Can I ask Paul Darby, Corporate Director of Resources, to present the report, please?
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. Consideration of this report meets the Council's requirements in terms of the Prudential Code, and the report includes details of our performance against the Treasury Management Policy and Strategy and the support and prudential indicators agreed by Council as part of the 21-22 budget setting in February 21. Members will recall that the half-year position was considered by Cabinet in November of last year and then by the Council in December. The table of paragraph 14 provides a summary of our overall Treasury Management position at the 31st of March 22, where members will see that we had total debt outstanding of 418 million and total cash investments of 328 million, our net debt position therefore being 90 million. There are comparative figures for the position at the 31st of March 21 provided in that table, and members will see that whilst our net debt position at the year end was broadly the same as the beginning of the year, our overall external borrowing at the year end is around £55 million higher, as was our cash investments, reflecting the receipt and carryover of significant grant funding at the year end. The Council's borrowing activity during the year is detailed in sections 16 to 20 of the report, and last year we took out new borrowing totalling 55 million. There were no new maturity loans that expired last year, but principal repayments of around £500,000 were paid on annuity loans in the year. The average rate of interest on our external debt is 3.25% currently, which is around 0.18 percentage points lower than the position in 2021. In paragraphs 21 and 22, there's a bit of an overview of our overall external debt and long-term liabilities held by the Council, and these relate principally to long-term PFI liabilities and finance leases, most notably for vehicle leasing. There's an overview of our investment activity set out in sections 23 to 29, and the table at paragraph 24 provides a breakdown of the institutions, the length of investments and the interest rate secured on those investments at the 31st of March 22. All the investments undertaken in the year and held at the year end remain in line with our Treasury Management strategy and associated policies. In line with the requirements of the Prudential Code, from paragraph 30 onwards, the report sets out details of our performance against the various Treasury Management and prudential indicators, including details of our capital expenditure and financing and our capital financing requirement in 21-22 and to the year end. I draw members' attention to the fact that at the 31st of March 22, the Council was around £33 million under borrowed against its capital financing requirement. This is a managed position, with new external borrowing continuing to be delayed as we balance the current cost of carry and cash flow requirements in light of the significant advance grant payments we continue to be paid by the government. The Council is effectively internally borrowed in this regard. There is, however, an underlying need to take out these loans in the future, and the budget provision exists to meet the cost of servicing those loans, and in April 22, new loans totalling £50 million were indeed taken out. In summary, Chair, members, I appreciate this is quite a technical report, but members can take assurance that the Council remains in a strong position in terms of its Treasury Management activity, and we continue to fully comply with our strategy and policies. Thank you, Chair. The recommendation set out of paragraph 7.
Thanks, Paul. Can I invite Councillor Richard Bell, Deputy Leader and Cabinet Portfolio Holder for Finance, to speak to the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. I would like to thank the officers for this comprehensive update on our Treasury Management activity for the last year and for setting out our position as at 31st of March 22. It's pleasing to note that we remain in a strong financial position and this have fully complied with all the requirements of the Treasury Management policy and strategy agreed by County Council in February 21. Carefully managing our cash flows, external borrowing and investments and maintaining compliance with the relevant codes of practice in line with our prudential framework is fundamentally to delivering on our fiduciary responsibilities for public money. Treasury management is an important area of activity, and I know the team are constantly reviewing our cash flows and treasury position. As we move from an area of low to high inflation and interest rates, we will need to be agile, and I know that we have a strong finance team that will fulfil all the necessary requirements. With that, Chair, I would like to move the report for Cabinet to note and ask Cabinet to agree for the report to be presented to Council in September.
Thanks, Richard. As the recommendation is for Cabinet to note the report, we don't require a seconder. However, is there anyone else wishing to speak on the report? Okay, can we note the report? Okay, I can confirm the report is noted. Move on to item 6, which is the 2021-22 final outturn for the General Fund and Collection Fund. Can I ask Paul Darby, Corporate Director of Resources, to present the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. In-year monitoring reports have consistently flagged the significant uncertainty and volatility across the year linked to COVID in particular, which has made forecasting extremely challenging in year. In Q3 and into Q4, this position was made all the more volatile and challenging due to rising inflation and a significant delay in resolving the pay negotiations nationally last year, with these issues continuing to impact on the current year. In terms of COVID impacts on our budgets, the report identifies that the Council received funding totalling £18.2 million, consisting of a core COVID impacts grant of £15.6 million and £2.6 million of funding through the Income Guarantee Scheme, which compensated the Council in part for loss of fees and charges up to the 30th of September. Unbudgeted expenditure and loss of income in year totalled £20.4 million, which was offset by COVID-specific underspending of just under £6 million, leaving a net COVID impact of £14.5 million for the Council last year, which is £3.742 million less than the government grant funding we received in year for 21-22. If we exclude COVID-related matters, there was a net cash limit underspend of £358,000 across the 5 service groupings last year, which includes a cash limit overspend of £3.771 million for children and young people services and a cash limit underspend for all the other services totalling £4.1 million. Details of the cash limit outturn for each service grouping are set out at paragraphs 59 to 108 of the report. There was a net corporate underspend last year of just over £11 million, which includes the £3.7 million of surplus funding received from the government for COVID versus our net costs, plus an underspend on the pay award, which was only settled in February 22 at 0.25 percentage points below the budgeted sum. Unbudgeted dividend income, additional Section 31 grant income and underspending against corporate contingencies last year. Whilst the pay award last year was less than budgeted, the expectation is that the pay award will be greater than the budget provision in the current year, which together with inflationary impacts on our energy, fuel, waste and transport budgets will mean we are facing significant overspends in 22-23, which will not be able to be accommodated from the corporate contingency budget in the current year. In light of these pressures and the updated MTFP 13 forecasts that have been prepared and which we will consider next on the agenda, a number of adjustments to general and earmarked reserves have been actioned as part of the final accounts close-down process. These are detailed in paragraph 46 and include the creation of a new budget support reserve alongside transfers into the climate change earmarked reserve, the corporate ERVR reserve and the culture reserve. The previous budget support reserve has been recategorised as an MTFP reserve, which is what it really is there for, and these transfers and adjustments total £15.3 million and build on the review of reserves that was undertaken during the year as part of the development of MTFP 12. Attached to the report at Appendix 4 is details of all of the earmarked reserves and balances held by the Council at the 31st of March 22. Excluding schools, but including the cash limit reserves, our earmarked reserves were £235 million at the 31st of March 22, which is an in-year decrease of around £10 million when compared to the position at the beginning of the year. Members will see that our earmarked reserves are once again broken down into those reserves held corporately, some held on behalf of third parties and grants, and some held by services for specific purposes. The general reserve balance at the 31st of March 22 is £25.9 million, which is broadly in line with the position at the beginning of the year and represents a small in-year reduction of £255,000, and the general reserve balance remains within, although at the bottom end, of the Council's general reserves policy of retaining a balance of between 5 and 7.5% of our net budget requirement, which in cash terms is between £23 and £35 million. The year-end balance of 25.9 equates to 5.55% of the 22-23 net budget requirement. At paragraphs 75 to 91, there's a detail of the outturn position against the dedicated schools grant, including our high needs SEND allocations, our schools block, plus our early years block and the centrally retained DSG allocations. The high needs DSG outturn overspend last year was £796,000, which is lower than the Q3 forecast and represents a £600,000 improvement on what we expected when we did the Q3 forecast. The overspending year does relate to primarily to top up funding provided to schools, and the cumulative deficit on the high needs DSG block, which will need to be recovered in future years, is now £8.8 million at the 31st of March 22. The early years DSG outturn, a £719,000 overspend, was a managed position and reflects the reduction in DSG funding received in the year, and the cumulative surplus on the early years DSG reserve carried forward is now £656,000. In terms of our schools, the maintained schools, the outturn position shows that collectively our maintained schools retained balances increased by £1.9 million last year. This is a significant improvement on the forecast submitted by the schools during the autumn term and reported to Cabinet in March, when schools were anticipated to draw £7.8 million from their cumulative reserves. Retained balances held by our maintained schools at the 31st of March is now just over £29.6 million. At paragraph 80, there are details of the outturn position for the schools with licensed deficits last year. Members will note that the £75,000 cumulative deficit for St Thomas More Roman Catholic School was written off following the conversion of the school during the financial year. The report includes details of the capital programme outturn from paragraph 116 onwards against the revised programme agreed by members in March. Members will see that the total capital expenditure in the year was just over £143 million, which is around £16 million or 10% below the revised budget agreed at Q3. Details of how the capital programme has been financed is set out at paragraph 121, and from sections 122 to 126 there's a detailed narrative explaining the reasons for the underspending against the revised budgets. It is proposed, and the recommendations to this effect in the report, that the underspending on the capital programme at the year end, which are primarily due to slippage in delivery, will be carried over and the 22-23 budgets augmented accordingly. This will be factored into the Q1 reports I'll present to Cabinet in September of this year. In terms of the collection funds, the report sets out details of the outturn position for both the council tax and the business rates collection funds, and they're set out from paragraph 127 onwards. Members will note that whilst in-year recovery rates improved last year as recovery action was reinstated, there was an in-year deficit on the council tax collection fund of £124,000 in-year. Taking the brought forward deficit into account, there was a £5.8 million deficit on this fund at the 31st of March 22, which compares with the previous forecast of around £5.8 million as well. The council's share of the deficit is about £4.9 million. The outturn position for the business rates collection fund is a deficit of just under £16 million in year, largely due to the retail reliefs that were applied in year and which were applied after the budgets were set. Taking the brought forward surplus into account, there was a £10 million deficit on the fund, which compares with a previous forecast of £11.3 million, so an improved position. The council share of the deficit was £4.9 million, or around £600,000 less than we were previously forecasting. The council's share of that deficit, however, is offset by a Section 31 grant from the government to compensate us for the various retail reliefs that were awarded last year, leaving a net surplus to the council on the business rates collection fund and broadly offsetting the position on the council tax collection fund. At paragraphs 158 and 162, there's a reconciliation of the various Section 31 grants that the council was allocated last year, which did exceed the budget forecast and contributed towards the corporate underspend we achieved last year. Finally, Chair, at paragraphs 163 onwards, there's a bit of a summary of the progress achieved in terms of delivering the £5.3 million of savings factored into the 21-22 budgets, and this shows that 100% of the savings that were factored into the budgets were delivered last year, and there's an update at paragraph 167 to 170 in terms of the HR implications from voluntary, compulsory and early retirements in year and since 2011. Chair, the recommendations are set out at paragraphs 26 and 27.
Thanks, Paul. If I can invite Councillor Richard Bell, Deputy Leader and Cabinet Portfolio Holder for Finance, to speak to the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to thank the Corporate Director and his team for this very comprehensive and thorough report. As we've heard, the COVID-19 pandemic continued to cast a shadow over our financial performance last year, which made financial forecasting particularly challenging in year and resulted in significant additional costs and loss of income. However, significant COVID-19 grant funding was made available by Government to the Council last year. Indeed, our net COVID-19 impacts were £3.742 million less than the grant funding we received. But it's still not certain whether and when things will fully return to pre-COVID levels, particularly in relation to waste tonnages and use of our leisure centres and our theatres, where income continues to be lower than pre-pandemic levels. This is something we must keep a close eye on, and is also a situation that is impacted by the squeeze on cost of living we're all facing as people have less disposable income for things like leisure as a result of the high inflation currently experienced. Overall, it's pleasing we've managed to keep within budget this year. However, with the exception of children and young people's services, gentlemen on the right note, all of our services were able to maintain their spending within the budgets they had available. The CYPS outturn showed a £3.8 million overspend and required a transfer from corporate reserves to offset this at year end. For a combination of one-off reasons, including the underspending against the COVID-19 grant funding we received last year, additional Section 31 grant income, one-off dividends, etc., there was a corporate underspend. This has allowed us to assess and make contributions to new earmarked reserves and to top up some earmarked reserves for the reasons set out in this report. This will help meet the inflationary pressures we are currently facing, which will produce significant overspends in the current year in relation to our waste, transport and energy budgets. We have also been able to top up our ER-VR reserve, which we may well need looking ahead to MTFP savings in item 7. The overall level of reserves held by the Council has reduced by £10.3 million when we compare the position at 31st of March 22 with 31st of March 21. The general reserve balance is broadly in line with the position at the previous year end, around £255,000 lower, and is within, though at the lower end, of our general reserves policy. The reserves held at 31st of March 22 are once again inflated by the receipt of grant funding in Q4 that has been carried over to meet commitments in the current year. Details of the grant funding and the sums held on behalf of third parties, which total £42 million as of 31st of March 22, are included in Appendix 4. The net position across the Council Tax Collection Fund and the Business Rates Collection Fund's outturn position shows an improvement on the Q3 forecasts we considered in March. In terms of the capital programme, it's pleasing to note that £143 million of capital expenditure was delivered last year, and while this was £15 million less than what was expected, there are good reasons for this underspending, and as the report outlines, the budget and funding is to be reprogrammed and reprofiled, and I support the carryover and augmentation of the current year's budgets in this regard. In summary, Chair, the report continues to demonstrate that the Council has strong financial resilience and exercises prudent financial management. This resolve and our balance sheet strength will surely be tested in the coming years and be required going forward as we face the challenges we are facing now and in the future. And with that, Chair, I would ask Cabinet to note the recommendations at paragraph 26 and approve the recommendations at paragraph 27 of the report. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Informally seconding, I'm going to try and pick up on a couple of points that haven't already been covered. So can I also thank the officers for what clearly is a very comprehensive overview of our financial performance last year. Managing the budget for one of the biggest councils in the country is certainly challenging at the best of times. And over the last 6 to 8 months, as inflation has soared and bank base rates have been increased, this has added a further layer of complexity and uncertainty in terms of financial forecasting. Overall, our reserves have reduced, as has been already explained, by around £10 million in year, and we continue to focus on delivering our ambitions and priorities, making investments in our excellent public services and delivering improvements. I'm pleased to note the position on the capital programme and would offer my thanks to all the programme and project managers for delivering these investments and for all of those that are still to come. I note that the reasons for budget variances in specific areas are set out in the report and fully support the reprogramming and reprofiling proposals set out in this report. With that, I'm happy to second the recommendations as set out. Would anyone else like to speak on this report? Okay, can we agree the report and its recommendations? Okay, I can confirm that the recommendations are agreed. So we move on to item 7, which is a medium-term financial plan 13, 2023-24 to 2026-27 and the review of the local council tax reduction scheme. If I can ask again, Paul Darby, Corporate Director of Resources, to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. As you say, this covers updated forecasts for our medium-term financial plan, covering the period 2023-24 to 26-27, so a 4-year period. And it also includes details of a review of the council tax reduction scheme and makes recommendations for the Cabinet to make proposals to County Council later this year. In paragraphs 27 to 29, there are some details of the updated assumptions and the forecast budget impacts on our medium-term financial plan. Members will see that the Council's facing significant, unavoidable budget pressures that need to be accommodated within the MTFP. These include updated forecasts in terms of the National Living Wage, based on the Low Pay Commission's forecasts published in March, and updated PM price general inflation assumptions. There are enduring pressures from high inflation that also need to be accommodated, particularly in 23-24, that are manifesting themselves in terms of overspends in the current year. And these are, as Councillor Bell outlined, around our energy, our waste contracts, as well as our transport contracts. And we also anticipate some budget pressures from our park and ride contract also, as that's reprocured in the current year. There are updated forecasts in terms of the impact of the adult social care reforms and the implementation of the fair cost of care exercise that we've been mandated to implement, which are expected to exceed the government grant funding that we'll be receiving through the adult social care levy. There are some additional investments factored into the MTFP in 23-24, particularly in preventative strategies to help offset the enduring cost pressures in children's social care, which are also recognised in the MTFP by way of demographic cost pressure increases. And there are some additional investments built into the budget next year in light of the learning from Storm Arwen in terms of tree inspections, but also in terms of budgets to provide for response in emergency matters. Members will see that the council tax increases across the next 4 years are in line with the MTFP 12 assumptions, but that we are now assuming that the government's fair cost of care won't come in till 24-25. We were previously anticipating that the formula changes would come in from next financial year. Members will be more than familiar with the pressures we face as a council from our low tax raising capacity, and where our ability to generate council tax from statutory set increases is less than our unavoidable inflationary impacts that we face. So we struggle as a council to fund just to stand still. The MTFP forecasts don't assume that the government will put any further funding into local government as part of the spending review later this year, and the updated funding gap or saving shortfall across the next 4 years is set out at paragraph 36 in the report, and members will see that we forecast a gap of around £55 million over the next 4 years, with a £22 million shortfall in 23-24, which will be a significant challenge in terms of balancing the budgets next year. There is a timetable set out at paragraph 40 in the report that details the further updates and the process that will be followed up to the budget setting meeting on the 22nd of February 2023, and the proposed consultation arrangements are set out at paragraphs 41 and 42 of the report. Clearly, achieving savings of £55 million over the next 4 years will be very challenging, and work is already underway to develop options and issues for consideration by Cabinet later this year. All the savings proposals will be subject to what are called the impact assessments and be subject to consultation in due course. In terms of the council tax reduction scheme for next year for 23-24, members will be aware that the council has retained a scheme in line with the National Council Tax Benefits Scheme, which was withdrawn in April 2013. We're the only council in the North East to do so, and one of only a handful nationally to retain a scheme that provides support to working age claimants in line with the National Council Tax Benefits System. The report sets out details of the council tax reduction scheme caseload and the trend over recent years, and members will see that at the 31st of March, 62% of all of the council tax reduction claimants in the county are of working age and 38% are pensioners. Pensioners have always been protected from the impact of the withdrawal of the National Council Tax Benefits System in 2013. In paragraph 78, there are details of the council tax reduction schemes currently in operation across our region. And members will see that one other authority does also provide, in certain limited examples, up to 100% support for working age claimants, and that's Newcastle City Council, having changed their scheme for the current year, although their scheme doesn't mirror the National Council Tax Benefits System. There are proposals in the report to retain our scheme again in 23-24 and to bring forward a report to Council later this year, as this is a decision retained for Council. The reason for doing so is that it reflects the current cost of living pressures and the enduring impacts of the welfare reforms on low-income households, and also the challenges of recovering what would be relatively low amounts from financially challenged households across the county. Chair, the recommendations are set out at paragraph 18.
Thanks, Paul. Can I invite Councillor Richard Bell, Deputy Leader and Cabinet Portfolio Holder for Finance, to speak to the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank the officers for this thorough report, which outlines the significant financial challenges we will face as we move forward and considers our options for balancing next year's budget and beyond. It's important, however, to point out that this report is not a budget-setting report. The assumptions on council tax increases and spending included in this report are merely for financial planning and forecasting purposes. The forecasts are based on a range of assumptions, and the budget-setting timetable set out in the report notes that further update reports will be presented to Cabinet in October and December as part of the development of next year's budget plans. There is significant financial uncertainty beyond this financial year, particularly in relation to the inflationary and demographic pressures we face and the amount of funding that will be made available. Put simply, the Council and wider sector need more government grant support. The County Council's network, SEGOMA, the Local Government Association and other lobbying bodies are clearly making the case for this support. The concern we have is that we are ultimately given additional council tax raising powers to help address these pressures, which will place us in a very difficult position when we come to set the budget next February. As we know, given our low council tax base, we cannot keep up with rising costs by increasing council tax alone. I attended the LGA conference recently, where it was announced that the sector was to receive a 2-year settlement later this year, with proposals to be published shortly for consultation. Whether that still transpires with the change of Secretary of State that has played out recently is uncertain. The report identifies that the Council is facing a forecast deficit of nearly £22 million next year, 23-24, and a funding deficit of around £55 million over the next 4 years. This being the position after we assume that we increase council tax by the maximum permissible 2.99%. Those on low incomes are currently afforded significant protection through access to support through the Council Tax Reduction Scheme, which, as members will see, we are proposing that we are to retain again next year, and I'll comment further on that in a moment. Balancing our budget next year and across the next 4 years will be a huge challenge based on these forecasts. It's vital, however, that we plan for the medium term, and this report provides us with a platform to do that. Many authorities have fallen foul of not planning sufficiently well ahead, not taking tough decisions early enough, not taking too high commercial risks, and using reserves to unsustainable levels. We will not count on such an approach here in Durham. The uncertainty that exists will not be resolved until we understand what the national funding position will be and the final details of the fair funding review are published. That said, the forecasts for next year assume a rollover of existing formula grant. As I mentioned, the report also sets out details of the review of the local council tax reduction scheme and proposes that Cabinet resolves to recommend to Council that we continue the protection for all claimants next year and do not cap the support that can be received. This is an important part of the Council doing its bit to support our less well-off residents during these difficult times. Clearly, this decision does come at a cost in terms of lost council tax revenues and is something few other councils now do across the country. As always, we'll need to review this position in a year's time and reflect on the administrative burden being created through multiple changes in circumstances for those households on universal credit. To conclude, Chair, we are seeking from Government clarity, stability and additional financial support. As we sit here today, none of those seems likely in the short term. We are therefore obliged to plan for the worst and hope that by year end things will improve. And with that, Chair, I move the recommendations as set out in the report at paragraph 18.
Thanks, Richard. As has been outlined, the MTFP forecasts before us and the challenges we will face in balancing our budget next year will be extraordinarily difficult to manage. I would reiterate, though, that this is not the budget, but an update on the development of the budget. This position is unprecedented and exacerbated by the significant, unavoidable cost pressures we are experiencing, from inflationary increases in energy, waste and transport contracts, from the impacts of national living wage increases, and from enduring demographic pressures in children and young people's services. The report sets out a clear path for setting a balanced budget in February next year. If there is no further funding made available and these forecasts come to light, then we will surely need to make some very difficult decisions and rely on our reserves to help smooth in savings to produce a balanced budget. Officers and Cabinet members are working up plans to help balance the budget, and details of any savings to be factored into the budget will be presented in future reports. It is inevitable that savings will undoubtedly be required, and wherever possible, these will seek to limit impacts on frontline service delivery. I know Councillor Bell has and will continue to lobby Government directly for the additional financial support we need to help balance our budgets and meet the needs of our local residents. I am pleased that the report sets out a recommendation for Cabinet to recommend to County Council later this year that we retain the local council tax scheme without a cap on support. This is the right thing to do, given the hardship faced by so many residents, particularly at this time as we continue our post-COVID recovery and in light of the current squeeze on household incomes. With that, members, I'm happy to second the report. Is there anyone else wishing to speak? Yes, Councillor Shuttleworth.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I would thank Paul and his staff for what's a comprehensive and thorough report, but a sobering one in terms of financial outlook for this council if further government funding is not forthcoming. No, Richard is knocking on their doors to get the money in. There will undoubtedly be difficult decisions to come, and how we balance the budgets going forward if these forecasts are correct, but those decisions are for another day. I'm really happy to speak in support of the decision before us today on the local council tax reduction scheme. It's not a difficult one to take, and it's one that I fully support, and I hope that full council ultimately supports this recommendation too. We need to protect vulnerable people as best we can, particularly at this time as we all face this cost of living crisis. If ever there was a time to review our position on this scheme, this most certainly isn't that time. The proposals today will mean that the next year we'll once again retain a local council tax reduction scheme that protects all claimants and does not cap the support that can be received. This will be a massive relief to the 34,000 working claimants right across our county who currently benefit from 100% support, and where 80%, that's some 27,000 households, receive the maximum support and having no bill to currently pay. I would just like to say I fully support the recommendations set out in the report. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Is anyone else wishing to speak on this? Can we agree the report and the recommendations? Okay, I can confirm that the recommendations are agreed. Moving on to item 9, the UK Shared Prosperity Fund Investment Plan. Paul, you'll be pleased to know you've got a rest. So can I ask Jeff Paul, Interim Corporate Director of Regeneration, Economy and Growth, to present the report, please?
Thanks, Chair. The purpose of this report is to update Cabinet on the approach and progress made in developing an investment plan for the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, and seek approval for the delegated decision to submit the investment plan by the end of this month. County Durham has been allocated a conditional grant allocation of £30.8 million from the fund over the next 3 years, and in order to draw this down, an investment plan needs to be submitted to Government. This report outlines the approach taken to develop the plan, including the engagement with a wide range of stakeholders, the evidence base gathered to inform and identify local challenges and opportunities and the areas of focus proposed to be included in that plan. Chair, in terms of the background, the Shared Prosperity Fund is the government's successor fund to European funding and is a key component of the Levelling Up agenda. The table in paragraph 9 sets out a breakdown of the funding allocation given to us over the next 3 years, and it also includes an indicative revenue and capital split. The stated overarching aim of the fund is to increase pride in place and increase life chances across the UK. The fund intends to achieve this through 3 priorities, and those priorities are community in place, supporting local businesses, and people and skills. And the first 2 of those, the funding will commence in the current financial year. However, the people and skills priority funding will commence in 2024-25, and I'll come back to that issue. Durham County Council is the lead authority and will be the accountable body for the fund, and as such it has responsibility for leading on the development of the investment plan. It will take responsibility for receiving and managing the funding. It will assess and approve individual applications for projects. It will oversee the process of payments, and it will oversee the day-to-day monitoring of the various projects and schemes within the Shared Prosperity Fund. In terms of developing the investment plan and stakeholder engagement, the plan must be developed in conjunction with a local partnership involving a range of local stakeholders and must specifically include the active engagement of the county's 6 members of Parliament. The existing well-established County Durham Economic Partnership has been broadened to incorporate wider representation to reflect the nature of the fund. This Partnership Plus group has guided the development of the investment plan, and under this arrangement, a programme of active engagement with a wider range of local and regional stakeholders has been undertaken. Chair, the report summarises the engagement to date, and this has included a stakeholder engagement event, a briefing session for all members, and establishing thematic working groups to look at each of the 3 investment priorities. These working groups have been by open invitation and have included, but not exhaustively, representatives from the voluntary sector, community and civic society, enterprise agencies, housing providers, FE and HA organisations, the private sector and officers from the council. There's also been an opportunity to have considerable engagement with colleagues at a regional level to identify any activities that may better be delivered across the region rather than at the individual council level. In terms of the investment plan and approach to prioritisation of interventions, it requires that each area will set out how the fund will be delivered and what local priorities it will support. This includes using evidence to identify local challenges and opportunities, which will inform the selection of measurable outcomes and interventions under each of the investment priorities. Interventions can be chosen from a menu of 41 different options, and those options are included in Appendix 2. Within the investment plan, the funding allocation needs to be broken down against those 3 priorities, and which Durham thinks most closely meets with the opportunities and needs of the county. A wide range of local initiatives and schemes will qualify from the fund, ranging from local regeneration, learning and skills development, support for micro and community-led businesses. A key challenge, therefore, is to prioritise the investment priorities and interventions that will have the maximum local impact. The approach taken within Durham has been to develop a robust evidence base to inform this. As set out in the report, this has included building up a key data set which identifies a baseline position against each of the missions contained in the Levelling Up white paper. It's also been informed by the emerging results of the Big E conversation and the inclusive economic strategy development. It's also aligned to other existing strategies, for example, the County Durham vision. Input from the 3 thematic working groups has also helped identify past activity that has been effective and where there are potential gaps in provision. At this stage, Chair, the investment plan is not required to identify individual projects, and at present there is no call for projects. The report also identifies a number of guiding principles that would help the board inform the prioritisation of the activity areas, and these include Ensuring flexibility is built into the design of the programme at the start by identifying fewer but wider ranging interventions that are broad in nature and allow multiple activities to come forward. Also to ensure projects are brought forward which deliver against multiple impacts and benefits. It's also important, Chair, to ensure that the fund provides added value and doesn't duplicate other activity and funding. And the report identifies that another core principle is that all activities will be expected to contribute towards net zero, and this will cut across all of the investment priorities and interventions. So, Chair, summarising the investment plan, this has been informed by the evidence base and guiding principles, and the report summarises the challenges under each of the 3 investment priorities and the proposed areas of activities that should be included in the plan. Under the priority of supporting local businesses, a broad business support offer will be developed, offering support at all stages to encourage businesses to start, grow and to innovate. This includes a focus on growing the county's sector specialisms, social enterprise and the low carbon economy. Under the Communities in Place investment priority, a broad range of potential activities can be supported. Looking at the evidence and feedback, it is proposed key areas of focus will be investing in town centres and community infrastructure, enhancing the county's cultural offer, including events, supporting measures to address the cost of living, and delivering volunteering and social action projects that produce wider wellbeing impacts. Finally, it's proposed to develop a broad employability offer under the Peoples and Skills priority, and this will help reduce barriers to employment for residents currently economically inactive, supporting them into workplace, as well as providing funding for skills development, addressing skills shortages, particularly in the digital and green skills, which will support local growth. Chair, I'm going to come back to the priority of people and skills funding gap, people and skills, and just touch on a few minutes about the problem we have with the funding gap. Under the Shared Prosperity Fund for People and Skills, the funding for that is only to be introduced from year 3, from April 2024. There is an exception to this where the provision being undertaken by the voluntary sector can continue if it's demonstrated that the voluntary sector organisation is both at risk from funding running out and also where there is agreed that the activity is a priority to continue into future years. Currently, ESF funding is due to come to an end at the end of December. This therefore creates a funding gap of at least 3 months, although as projects start to wind down, this creates a much longer gap in the provision of employability support, potentially up to 9 months. The Council itself has been a major recipient of both ESF and ERDF funding to invest in key priority areas for the Council, funding employability projects like Durham Works, Durham Enable and Durham Directions. The transition from EU to UK Shared Prosperity Fund will have major implications, therefore, to the Council as these come to an end, including issues in relation to staffing. There are currently 190 Council staff funded through EU funding. Chair, a separate report will come forward outlining the issues associated with this problem, looking at how we can potentially maintain current provision, how we can mitigate risk and what the budgetary pressures are associated with this issue. Finally, Chair, in terms of next steps and investment plan submission, as I've mentioned, the investment plan needs to be submitted by the 1st of August. It's expected that government will consider these through the summer and will approve the first plans from October 2022. I think over the last week, however, we need to be realistic, and that timescale may well be impacted by the current situation in government. A plan of forward work, including ongoing engagement and arrangements for calling in for projects, is being devised, which will move activity forward and beyond the submission of the investment plan. Given the timescales involved, it's also proposed to start identifying activities from summer 2022 onwards. This will be through a range of mechanisms, including open calls, commissioning and procurement, depending on the most suitable route. Chair, the recommendations are set out in paragraph 8 of the report, including requesting delegated authority to agree the final investment plan to be submitted before the deadline.
Thanks, Jeff. Can I invite Councillor Ted Henderson, Cabinet Portfolio Holder for Children and Young People Services, to speak to the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. The UK Shared Prosperity Fund is a key component of the government's flagship policy to level up. The administration wants to ensure that County Durham benefits fully from this, maximising the impact of it for the residents of the county. In the development of the plan, a robust evidence base has been developed to identify our local challenges and the opportunities and inform the proposed areas of activities that will be included within the investment plan. Supporting this, there has also been considerable engagement with the partners on the development plan, including last week's stakeholders event and regular meetings with the thematic working group. The Cabinet has previously agreed to develop an inclusive economic strategy, and this will be considered in the autumn. What is clear from the work to date is that the residents, the businesses, councillors and young people have engaged in a comprehensive conversation about what it needs to build a sustainable and inclusive economy. The information from this has also helped shape the persistence of activities within the plan. The proposed activities set out in the report will help to deliver our inclusive economic strategy and the aspirations of our residents of the county's economy. UKSPF will support investments in our town centres and high streets. The enhancement, promotion of the county, though activities that support our cultural and businesses. It will support our local businesses, helping them to start, grow and innovate. It will support our most disadvantaged residents, access employment by reducing the barriers to work, and will increase skills development, addressing skills shortage that enable economy to grow. I therefore propose the recommendations in paragraph 8 of this report. Thank you.
Thanks, Ted. Can I invite Councillor Mark Wilkes, Cabinet Portfolio Holder for Neighbourhoods and Climate Change, to speak on the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. The Shared Prosperity Fund is supposed to be the replacement for European funding, and I'll come on shortly as to why there are issues with this. But as a council, we will be making sure that the investment we've been given is directed into improving areas like job prospects and employment, helping us lead the green revolution and building our county's economy to bring it up to levels seen in more affluent parts of the country. However, I have to say that at present, the funding being offered by government doesn't even come close to replacing the funding lost and which would have come to County Durham from EU grants. That is a fact. There are also timing issues which the Director has referred to that we as a council need to work through and address where we can. Prior to us leaving the EU, we were upgraded to an area in need of more funding. The government needs to recognise this. After all, they recognise this for Cornwall, which is receiving significantly more shared prosperity funding than County Durham, despite now economically being in a better position than us. We're being left short to the tune of tens of millions of pounds, and County Durham deserves better. So whoever's running the country when decision-making starts again, please give our county and region the funding we were promised when we left the EU, and give it us now, not when it's too late. I second the report, Chair.
Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to speak on this report? No. Can we agree the report and its recommendations? Right, thank you. Okay, item 10 is any other business. I haven't been notified of any other business, so I'd just like to thank everyone for taking part, and to those members of the public and media who have watched this morning. That concludes the business for this meeting.